Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Nine Inch Nails Retrospective, where my friend Luke and I, and whoever feels like joining us at the current moment, which right now is nobody, so it's just a club for the two of us. Hell yeah. Talk about industrial music's biggest and debatably best band. And last time you heard from us, we were talking about With Teeth and the kind of curious assessment that both we and the culture of music kind of received that record at the time, which was not super great. It wasn't quite bad, but there is now a big paradigm shift that has happened in terms of Nine Inch Nails' commercial success, their overwhelming kind of staying power when it comes to the wider world of alternative music. But in terms of like raw success, the mobility of this band is just going to continue to go up and up and up. Because after With Teeth, we kind of see Trent just sort of barrel forward at full speed because this is, I think, the span of time in which Trent is probably the busiest that he has ever been or will ever be, considering the remainder of the decade and a little bit after that is going to be basically nonstop work of him doing simultaneously soundtrack work and albums. And today we're kind of going to be talking about this split little dichotomy that we have in front of us by talking about the next album in the discography. However, we're going to abridge the segment somewhat and mainly focus on Luke's thoughts on it because, technically speaking, we've already talked about Year Zero. Riley and myself did a record club on it years and years ago, I think back in 2021, but we really dug into a lot of what that album was and how we felt about it in ways that I feel like if I was going to talk about Year Zero in like an extended forum again, I would really just end up repeating myself.
Mhm.
However, I do think it's important to note that I kind of noticed a bit of, might you call it, symmetry in this new decade that we're moving into with the band and this new kind of era. We're starting off with Teeth, and that's kind of just a simple nuts and bolts album, as we discussed, much like Pretty Hate Machine in a lot of respects. And now we are actually going to move to the next album, Year Zero, and honestly, I find a lot of kinship in between this and the downward spiral when it comes to
Hmm.
the broad macro of what this is, because Trent was very involved in the kind of online process of, distributing With Teeth. It didn't have traditional liner notes, all that jazz. But now we're going into Year Zero, and it kind of feels like everything he did to sort of mass market the album on places like MySpace and have sort of a kind of ARG thing going on in order to get fans really invested. That like doubles and triples for the rollout of Year Zero, which is filled with lots of different like ARG stuff and a bunch of stuff that Trent just sort of released as kind of cryptic messages to communicate with fans and kind of teased that the album itself was going to be a concept album, much like the Downward Spiral. So I think you could argue that Trent was taking advantage of the new tools at his disposal in order to present something that fans and people in general might just have been more willing to accept and go with when it comes to what they expect from Nine Inch Nails. We kind of saw the sort of societal and political or kind of creeping back into Trent's music. And that finds itself at the center stage at Year Zero because this is very much a concept album that is about what else but tangentially the Iraq War, the Bush administration. There are several references directly to things like the letter G, for instance, on this album is in reference to the big G, God, or George Bush, whatever you want to take away from that.
Hmm.
But we are seeing Nine Inch Nails at their most political, at their most incendiary, and they are engaging their fans in this new, really interesting and really exciting way. So, Luke, tell me, how did you go into year zero, and how did that experience play to you as somebody who's going through the discography in order now?
So it was interesting. This is like now my third time listening to this album. The first time was when I was kind of at a point of like, okay, I'm going to listen to basically everything. I came across this album and really, really enjoyed it quite a lot. There was a second listen at some point later on in the future where I don't know if it was for this podcast, but I do know that it was fairly recently. I re-listened to it and honestly was kind of in a much more mixed feelings towards it. Like I think my main takeaway was that a lot of the lyrical elements were interesting, but like in terms of like the sonic quality, it kind of felt like a step down from what came before it. And this third time, I'm sort of in like an in-between of like I do like it. I think it's just the first half is kind of clunky in terms of certain songs and just the presentation of them in some ways. And the best way I can describe it is a lot of people about with Teeve said this was like Nine Inch Nails going commercial, which I don't agree with that at all. But I could kind of maybe possibly get the argument for something like this because coming off of With Teeth, it does feel like it hits a lot of the similar beats except for, and specifically like the lyrics, because there's a lot of pointed specificity for lyrics that you're kind of mentioning with the context of which was made the Iraq War and that sort of thing. And also I think there's some notes of talking about kind of climate change. I forget like which
Mhm.
song Capital G had the lines "Don't give a shit of the weather in Guatemala" and that sort of thing, where it's like very specific things. But I think honestly, for me, Nine Inch Nails has worked best when it's not so pointedly specific, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
This is a case where it's knowing is 2007 and knowing just some of the stuff that's even really covered in here. It is very obvious what it is trying to get across. And there's some songs where it really works, but there's other times where it is definitely like a you will get message now. But that being said, there are still a couple of tracks on this that I do quite love. In fact, I think my personal favorite is God Given. That one is probably my personal favorite on this one.
Banger song.
Yeah.
Honestly, I kind of agree with a lot of what you're saying. I do, in fact, think that the second half of the album is much stronger than the first. And there is kind of a problem that this album does have that I think that the writing and I appreciate the writing and the concept of this album a whole lot. That being said, this story of somebody of like a soldier who's kind of been brainwashed and programmed to think a certain way, having a revelatory moment that kind of sends him on his own downward socio-political spiral. But I would agree that I think the concept of this album, especially after listening to With Teeth, it does see Trent writing himself into a little bit of a corner where I feel like the concept on an album like The Downward Spiral was a vehicle to explore a greater issue. This, on the other hand, almost feels like a self-imposed limitation rather than a vehicle for exploration. In tandem with the fact that sonically, sound-wise, this album is far more thin sounding. I would say that it's a little
Hmm.
bit more digital in nature. And Nine Inch Nails has always kind of sounded that way, but I feel like, with all of the technological advancements being made and with Trent about to pivot fully into soundtrack works as hard as he's about to, we do kind of see him showing off a production style that may not get along with people as much. Like, I prefer some of the more personal songwriting on the previous album and the fuller production. This feels like it's a bit more of an offshoot compared to some of the rest of the discography. It's a great album, but I do think the things that make it unique are also some of the things that hold it back a little bit from maybe being the
Yeah.
best version of itself.
Yeah, like I think what you're saying about sort of just like maybe the digital thinness, I think that first half especially because I think for me it's like we have to get to like three tracks in before I'm like, okay, I kind of like this actually. Good Soldiers when I'm starting to really get into it, but then it's followed immediately by a song that I kind of like and hate at the same time, which is Vessel, because there is just like a
Interesting.
funky kind of interesting quality to it, but also the rhythm is what I describe as like digital farts.
It's,
Like,
as somebody who really likes how like weird and funky this is, yeah, it does kind of have that quality. And I will say that instrumentally, this is sort of the album thus far in their discography where I just kind of get along with what it's doing the least, but I still think that Trent's instincts are strong enough to kind of buoy some of the weaker moments. And, I'm focusing a lot on the negative here just because that's kind of the most interesting things you can say about an album like Year Zero, which has had a minor reevaluation, kind of like some of their other records in recent years, mainly for that conceptual angle. But it is something that, again, it less invites me in and more presents an obstacle in that you kind of get in the time frame of being like, I have to really put myself back and try and imagine what it was like when Bush was in office so that this is a little bit more lyrically salient, which, I mean, I guess these days isn't that hard, but
yeah,
it's a very distinct sort of approach that I feel like can have its strengths and weaknesses depending on who you are and what you look for in a Nine Inch Nails album. Again, that second half
yeah,
is really, really solid. I think that The Greater Good is one of my favorite songs on here. I also really love the penultimate
same.
song, In This Twilight. The kind of second half of this, I will say for my many criticisms of Year Zero, even though, again, I am very positive on this album, I can't stress that enough. However, I will say that this is the first album I will definitively say in this discography that second half is better than the first, in that all of the other, we kind of talked about how every
True,
Nine
yeah.
Inch Nails album has that front side and then back side dilemma of them having a kind of more single oriented, traditionally structured first half and a kind of weird esoteric second half. This is the first time where I think the weird esoteric second half is better than the fundamental stuff. You get to really enjoy the eccentricities of Trent. So I can really see, like, it makes a lot of sense why this came afterwards. In a lot of respects, you could make the argument that the production style sounds the way it does because Trent wanted to make it more anti-commercial rather than like now it's kind of the opposite of the effect of evaluating with teeth in the future, because we come back and we're like, oh, maybe this wasn't what people thought it was. Whereas with Year Zero, it's probably that digital production was still not like as prevalent as it is now. It wasn't as enormous as it was now. So it kind of probably felt sort of homespun and, well, punk rock, that he wasn't relying on the traditional tropes of rock music and what rock music sounded like. So I
Yeah.
understand that for sure. It's just that the foundations that this are built on, it's a little less about Trent and what he's going through and a little bit more, again, socio-political, which is fine. It's just that you really do have to be in a certain kind of mood to listen to music that was like about this moment in time. It's like why I
Yeah.
don't always go back and listen to like American Idiot by Green Day, where it's just like, yep, puts me right back in 2004. Don't care for it. I don't like
Yeah.
being here.
It
American
really
Idiot's a great
is.
album for the record. I just don't like being in that headspace.
It is like a case of you really have to want to have the like what's that fucking toy that like you do this little thing and it like flip through pictures like and you like see through it. I'm trying to think like what it's called. I'm just gonna call it like a picture flipper, but like that for like the mid 2000s is like what stuff like this and American Idiot would really accomplish for you. But the thing is like I think there are small little moments near that back half where there is still like weird experimentation. I think it's not as eloquent, but it's still kind of like exhilarating. Like I really enjoy the second, like the back half of The Great Destroyer, where it's like, this starts off
Yes.
surprisingly calm vocals, but then the second half, well, there's a reason it's called The Great Destroyer because it's the Great Destroyer of my
The
ears.
great destroyer of my fucking eardrums, mate. For my all of my criticisms, what I will give Year Zero is that it has big swings. And I understand Trent's inclination to want to take those big swings after kind of getting himself, well, back to zero on the previous record. So it's around this time where Trent's musical horizons are about to expand even further, because there was this little film that came out just 3 years after year zero in 2010, we see the reunification of a creative partnership that is going to last until, well, now still. That being, of course, the creative partnership between David Fincher and Trent Reznor, because David Fincher sort of made his name on music videos. You know, he directed a lot of music videos for people like Madonna, for instance. He did the Vogue music video. And then once he was in the system, once he made a movie like Seven, which, as we talked about, did feature a remixed Nine Inch Nails song in the opening credits, we're also seeing David Fincher work on Nine Inch Nails music videos, but now he's getting Trent to score a full movie for him. And we enter what, I mean, this could be, you could reasonably make the argument that 2010's The Social Network score is the most culturally important piece of music that Trent Reznor has ever made. Do you think
Yeah,
that's a
I could
fair thing
argue
to
that.
say?
I would describe like what this was as like I'd describe this as like what Trent Reznor and like Atticus Ross did with film score using like synthesizer and like just like digital distortion is like what fucking John Williams did with the French horn.
You know what? That's a perfect comparison point, actually. And I was kind of being a bit intentionally provocative when I said a creative partnership, because this is really technically the beginning of the creative partnership between Trent Reznor and, of course, Atticus Ross, who is kind of, I would say, is kind of a guy who's focused on things like atmospherics. He's somebody who really kind of pushes to the forefront that, like, I feel like Trent deals with a lot of the more, nuts and bolts instrumental stuff, whereas the kind of washes of atmospheric sound, that's normally what I attribute to Atticus Ross. And Atticus Ross is going to be a permanent collaborator with him on these soundtracks and in Nine Inch Nails music proper as well going forward. So this is very big. And with The Social Network, there is just, man, it's very difficult to talk about this assuming that like anyone doesn't know what the soundtrack to this movie sounds like, because this movie was everywhere. The
Yeah.
phenomenon of Facebook being as all-consuming as it was, and then there being news on the horizon that there was going to be a Facebook movie, which nobody really knew what that meant. Like, what do you mean there's going to be a Facebook movie? Like, is that going to be like the Emoji Movie, but for face? Like, what are we even doing? And then we see
Yeah.
that David Fincher is making it, and it's based off of a book, and it's like, oh, this is about the creation of Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg and all of that stuff. And one of the most memorable things about it, and just the things that people talk about the most, is the score to this film, which is very memorably so focused on two instrumental ideas: the piano and the synth. And woo, Nelly, does this
Yeah.
soundtrack utilize those two things to their maximum effect? Like, every note of this score burned into me. I've seen the movie
Same.
dozens of times at this point. It used to be kind of mid-rank Fincher for me, but like, as I've gotten older, as the world has gone forward, my like appreciation for The Social Network just grows and grows, and being like, oh, this isn't a movie about Facebook. This is a horror movie about the digital age.
Yeah, ostensibly. And
And
that's what the sound of it is like.
and that's why you getting Trent to do this soundtrack work so much, is that I associate Trent and David Fincher being together, even without their partnerships, as two artists who are simultaneously really vanguards of, old tradition within film and music that is maybe seen as like uncool or whatever, but like people who value their artistic mediums and try to carry those values forward. And also simultaneously as people who are innovators, specifically digital innovators, because David Fincher is maybe the reason that like digital technology in film is as prevalent and widespread as it is right now, mainly because of its usage in movies like The Social Network. Like, you take a look at that film and you're like, damn, this is a very digital looking movie.
Very much so.
But David Fincher is a damn good filmmaker, and it doesn't matter that something is digital because, when a film nerd says that a film is digital looking, that is not an inherent value judgment. That's just kind of a it looks like this. Like the
It has a
newest
quality to it.
yeah, like the best kind of comparison I can think of, another kind of digital innovator being Danny Boyle, recently had the
Yes.
28 Years Later movie, which is like one of the most aggressively digital films I have ever seen. Like, if you
Yes.
judged that movie visually by the standards of what traditional film is supposed to look like, you'd be like, why is this so like ugly and just saturated and like like the motion in it is so strange. And
So
then look at
bright.
it as a feat of digital photography and it's like, "Oh my God, this is incredible." That's why we have like that's the reason basically that it looks like that, and the reason that people are allowed to do wild shit like that is because people like Fincher were coming along and putting this down and getting a lot of acclaim and a lot of financial success because of it. And I mean, when people weren't talking about the hoodie and fuck you flip flops and the Sorkin script, they were talking about the soundtrack to this movie. Like, there was a laundry list of things that people were discussing when it came to the performances, the screenplay, the direction, all of that stuff. But I very distinctly remember the top list of things was the score.
Very much so. And it's such an like interesting thing too, because I mean it's like this is the first time that these two guys have done proper film score because like you could argue like Trent Reznor did music stuff for things like David Lynch movies and like Natural Born Killers. That was more like a music supervisor role rather than like someone who's doing creating music specifically for the film. And in
It
this
was
case
less
it's just
involved.
yeah, very much less involved. And something like The Social Network is just so interesting because it's like a sound that's already like fully formed for filmmaking and for just this entirely like honed in on like the kind of thing this is and also just very willing to wear its influences on its sleeve because there's a like a version of In the Hall of the Mountain King that's very much Wendy Carlos basically.
Oh God, that's yeah,
That
yeah,
scene is
yeah. That's
so
That's
Wendy
another
Carlos.
fantastic sequence in that movie, the Hall of the Mountain King, like with the cross cutting of like the boat race and everything, and it's super hectic and like that's a really digital sequence. It really feels like
Yeah.
it feels like both Fincher and Trent were just on the same page creatively because I can't imagine even a single note of this score being any different than it is. Like there are songs like Hand Covers Bruise or In Motion
Yes.
that I am just like I feel like these are now as recognizable as any Nine Inch Nails hit. Like just the couple piano notes for that first piece of music that we hear in the opening credits, the boom, boom, boom,
Yeah.
boom,
Yes.
like forever
Those
implanted in my brain.
those if someone described to me like what Trent Reznor's sound is to me, it would be those first few notes because I
Hmm.
always associate Trent Reznor's style as these discordant piano notes. Like it could be a song that doesn't even have piano. It's like different instruments, but you still just find like the DNA of a dun dun dun, just like the little
Hmm.
pause between these like interesting little patches of notes. And yeah, and it's just so interesting because it's not at all like the type of music you would think for a film like this. Because like with a film like this, it's like a biopic basically. So you would think kind of like traditional, just energetic music. And there is energetic music in this, but something I think that one is a reason why this had probably some kind of connection with Trent Reznor, but two also just adds to the atmosphere of the film is we talked a lot about like Trent Reznor's and Nine Inch Nails music as kind of like being about people really of like disconnected from everything else around them or in like kind of a almost antisocial like sort of behavior. And it's kind of interesting that Trent Reznor was brought onto a project like this because I think with Trent he's like a person who was able to still find connection via like his creative outlets and that sort of thing. Whereas this is a movie about a guy who becomes deeply successful because of his antisocial behavior.
I mean, you could go back and listen to many Nine Inch Nails songs, even recent, relatively in the like decade in which this was made, and be like, "Oh, Trent Reznor is talking about Mark Zuckerberg." Like on this
Exactly.
album, he is talking about people like him and, basically techno oligarchs. And it's again, it's like this new sort of we have the new age of digital robber barons that the social network is ushering in, and it feels like who else could make the soundtrack to that other than Trent Reznor? That it just feels so appropriate, as though he was designed in a lab to be able to make the score and soundtrack to this specific event and this specific person. And
Yeah.
it was like immediately people were excited to see that they were going to be working again in the following year with his The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo adaptation that was also going to be scored by Trent Reznor. Very memorably, this also features a remix of a Led Zeppelin song as the kind of intro
Mm,
to the movie, which also like really looks like a Nine Inch Nails music video. And boy howdy, I love the Social Network score. There's not a hot take that I have about it. Absolutely one of the most significant works of art that he's made, and one that I've listened to a lot. I'm going to make the argument that basically everything that isn't that is like woefully underrated by most people in general, just because I feel like the idea of a Trent Reznor score has, just because of how popular it's been, kind of been taken for granted by some people. And thus, when we have something like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo here, which I think is very excellent, though I will say, and underrated to a degree, I will say it does sound a little too close to the Social Network score for my liking, particularly because I'm so familiar with like the other score works that do such a great job at making themselves feel insanely distinct for the movies that they belong to. But this was literally a year apart. I completely
yeah.
understand why this was the case, but it also kind of explains why you don't hear people talking about it quite as much. Like it is the closest it is the closest that Reznor gets to making something that I would call stock, but Trent Reznor's stock is like, a 7 out of 10 on a bad day.
And also, I'd argue, like, especially with that film, it's a case of something that I think is important to note with, like, Trent Reznor's, like, style of soundtrack is that it's kind of, people have, like, an idea that the film score and, like, the sound design of the film are just completely separate things. But
Yep,
sometimes, like, in this case, they are sort of just embedded into one another. And I think
100%.
that's where this film shines is that its sound design does kind of become more or less score in a lot of ways.
And something that we should keep in mind is like this is simultaneously happening as Trent is releasing albums under Nine Inch Nails, which we will talk about.
That too.
But at this moment in time, he's also building off the back that he released something called the Ghosts Project, which is several albums worth of instrumental music that Trent released that is entirely royalty free. Like if you are a creative and you want to use something for a soundtrack or you need something, you can use this 100% of it and everything will be fine legally. And frankly, there's a lot of good shit in here. I've actually listened to this while writing a good deal. And if you are a fan of the Raid movies, it is the final
Yes.
song that is utilized in the Raid 2, aka the greatest fucking action movie. Fucking god damn.
Also, it has the instrumental that eventually was used on the song Old Town Road by Lil
Yes!
Nas X.
Yes, that little string that cling, cling, cling.
Yeah.
That is a piece of music by Trent Reznor. Very, very good. I would not have remembered to mention that. But yes, that is kind of the bedrock, I feel, of all of his sort of instrumental work. But it's not until 2014 where we have like a significant advancement where we get the soundtrack to Gone Girl, which I think is even better than the soundtrack to The Social Network. Oh my fucking God.
Same.
It's so good. It's so good. The music that plays in the sequence where it's the flashback that is showing you Rosamund Pike discovering Ben Affleck having an affair, where he does
Mhm.
the little thing with the fingers and the kid. That piece of music is fucking unreal.
Yeah.
Fucking unreal. It's using a lot of the same tonalities, but to me, this is a soundtrack that's even more about atmosphere.
And it's such like ultra specific sounds too that I remember from this thing. During the Sugar Storm track, there's like this sound that I can only describe as like a radar ping that goes like
Yes.
boom, boom. And it's like
Yes.
things like that about the soundtrack that really stick to the back of my mind so heavily. And I think partially also it's just because the first experience of watching Gone Girl was very interesting for me in the case of I watched it when I was 13 and I hadn't really watched a whole lot of R-rated films at that time. So I kind of this was like a real like, oh, I'm watching like a proper grown-up film. And Gone Girl is a very much proper grown-up film in a
I
lot of
I
ways.
I had a similar experience because at the time when Gone Girl came out, 2014 was the year I basically started to take film seriously as an art form. Like I was
Same here.
in media arts in high school, I was making stuff, and I was finally like, oh, I'm paying attention to what movies are being released and independent films and like things that are only going to get shown at Sundance that I'll probably have to track down online. And one of the films that I found online because, I couldn't drive myself to a movie theater because I was fucking 14 or whatever the hell. Actually, I was 16. But
Mm.
I remember pulling it up on my laptop and then just like waiting until I got home and then finally watching it kind of in secret because I was like, ooh, it's a pirated movie. I can't, ooh, gotta be quiet
Yeah.
about it. Whatever. And then I watched it and I knew nothing about it. Like I just knew it was the new David Fincher movie. And I was in high school. David Fincher was my favorite filmmaker, and frankly, isn't really far from my favorite filmmaker these days. But I watched that, and that is a very intensely memorable movie filled with intensely memorable scenes and sequences. And the thing I took away from it first and foremost was the soundtrack and how much I loved it. That radar ping sound is such a great thing to hone in on because that's the sound, the tone that I most associate with this. And it's simultaneously like this really icy sort of artificial sound, but it also kind of caresses you. It's also kind of comforting.
Yeah.
It finds this
Soft.
weird, yeah, it finds a weird, uncanny middle ground that I feel like the movie matches the energy of, in that you are simultaneously comforted and deeply disquieted. It's such a great mixture, and there's also moments where like the sequence in which a certain character is murdered incredibly violently, where we get that buzzing, harsh electro synth score thing coming back in from The Social Network, but because the rest of the soundtrack doesn't really sound like that, this one moment, the kind of just sound of
Yeah.
it is just kind of like that. It like
Yeah.
legitimately reaches into my gut and feels like it's pulling something out of it, and I'm like,
I
it's
describe it
so
as
good.
like an all-encompassing fluorescent light.
Yeah, it is a very kind of synesthetic experience listening to the Gone Girl score. It is probably the soundtrack here that we will talk about that I have listened to the most, at least in contention for it.
I think that might also be the case for me because so a track from both Gone Girl and The Social Network were pieces of music that I had really like internalized and loved so much that in high school when I was making like a documentary short, I literally used them as music for it, which is very funny because I think both of those exact same pieces of music, like 5 years later, were used in a documentary about Fire Festival.
Wow. Well, heard it here, folks. Luke here is an innovator.
I am an
Beat them
innovator.
to the punch. It's
They
there.
stole my flow.
The track Sugar Storm in particular, as well as Like Home and Technically, Missing, some of my favorite songs from that particular soundtrack. And after this, whoo Nelly.
Yeah.
In 2016, we actually had a collaboration between Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross, Gustavo Santaolalla, who you may know as the composer for The Last of Us, and Mogwai, the post-rock band, did a soundtrack for a documentary, I believe, called
Mm,
Before the Flood. And
yes.
after I have not heard that, I don't know why, considering I actually love all three of these collaborators a lot, so I
Yeah.
should probably fix that.
Yeah, it's I don't remember the soundtrack very well, but they have an original song that is pretty good. That's basically like I think
Consistently
it's
true.
an end credit song, type thing. And it's great because in true like Trent Reznor fashion, like the end credit song for like because it's a documentary about climate change for people who don't know, instead of it being the big like triumphant we must prevail prevail. It's like Trent Reznor's like, I don't want this all to go away, kind of type shit.
Very, very interesting choice of collaborators there. Never would have pegged that, but that's kind of awesome. He also did the Mark Wahlberg vehicle Patriots Day. I will
Yeah.
admit, I am completely unfamiliar with this, so
Listen, I watched that movie. Listen, I've watched every movie they've scored. That's like second least favorite score because genuinely it is like what I describe as like anonymous music of like, wait, they did that one?
they're not all winners. And I also think too, comparing some of the non-Fincher collaborations to the Fincher collaborations, it's like Luke said, there is such an involved sort of position that you can be in terms of like composing and doing sound design, where I feel like David Fincher like allows Trent Reznor to be a part of the legitimate creative process, whereas on things like Patriots Day, it's basically just, hey, here's this movie, do the sound for it. And it's like, that is a lot of work in and of itself, but it allows for kind of less synergy, less integration. It's not going to be as closely associated with the movie just because it's not built into its DNA. Also, in the same year as the Patriots Day score, they did the score for the Vietnam War, which I believe is like an 18-hour documentary on the Vietnam War.
Yeah, I haven't watched that myself, but I have listened to the soundtrack, and there's some tracks on that that kind of fuck, not gonna lie.
Fair enough, fair enough. The next one is another one of the iffier ones in that it's Bird Box, which is a movie
And
I've seen. I remember none of the score
that's
at
that's my
all.
bottom that's my bottom pick,
It is just, again, I couldn't even point out that it was bad or substandard. I just don't remember it being there.
which is not a good sign either.
No. And yeah, there's a couple unremarkable releases here, but right in 2019, we pick up with something that I will shout from the rooftops about, considering how good I think it is, and that being the collaboration between Trent Reznor and, Trent Atticus and Damon Lindelof with the Watchmen TV series soundtrack.
Yes.
Fuck yes! This
So good.
shit fucks so hard.
It's so good.
You get everything out of this soundtrack. And I mean everything from all eras, all sounds, every sort of thing that like if you are just somebody who loves the music of Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails and you love every single era, you are going to walk away with this with a grab bag of instrumental tunes that you're going to be jamming to in a playlist eventually. Because wow, there are instrumental covers here of songs like David Bowie's Life on Mars, which that was like one of the pieces of music I listened to the most when I watched the TV series, just because it was just so beautiful. It's a very simple, very stripped
Yeah.
back sort of piano cover of the song. And I mean, its usage in the show is very highly memorable. But man, it's evocative. And there's also pieces of music like Lincoln Tunnel, which is one of the most stirring, emotional, just genuinely heart-wrenching things I think Trent has ever made. It's just this, and it's completely different from
Yeah.
anything he's ever made. It's just this sort of soul vocal choir kind of just sort of building and ascending. And again, its utilization in the show is deeply memorable. But there's also very traditional, very percussive kind of just sort of throttling, filled with momentum moments of like Brick or what's the one that I associate with Rorschach all the time? It's oh well, there is my favorite Trent Reznor song title in this, which is None with a Motherfucking Gun.
Do you want to know something about that track? I
Yes.
remember that track quite specifically because for some reason, during college, it was the song I'd play when I knew I had to run between classes.
There you go. That would make me go faster too, to be fair. Doomsday Prepper was the track I was trying to think of. There is 3 volumes worth of music for this show that Trent and Atticus did. And genuinely, I think all of it's fantastic. There are like sinister, very Nine Inch Nails sounding songs, like Clockmaker, the instrumental to that just feels like it was plucked right off of the second half of The Fragile. And in many respects, this soundtrack work is that second half of The Fragile finally getting to evolve just outside Nine Inch Nails' current music. You're finding all of the things, the ambient tendencies, all of these things are finally materializing and evolving into something that, frankly, I think that I would prefer these things exist away from Nine Inch Nails' music because it kind of forces both of them to evolve without the other. And then as a result, I think both end up being better. Both bodies of work end up feeling richer because they have to focus on being themselves, essentially. So, I mean,
Yeah.
the Watchmen soundtrack, I'm over the moon about it. I love the Watchmen television show, and this was just, I mean, it sounded like something that was too good to be true, and then you listen to it and you're like, oh, goddamn, I guess it is.
Sometimes it do be true.
It do. In the same year, we did also get his score for the film Waves by Trey Edward Schultz. And
All
I'm going to
right.
admit something here. I don't much remember the soundtrack to this, but it's through no fault of the actual score itself, mainly because I really did not care for this movie. And it features several very obnoxious needle drops of songs that I really love that pissed me off so much I just kind of ignored the normal
It's I
score.
was gonna say it was more notable for the needle drops, but not in a positive way. I will say, like, I remember at least at one time I listened to the score by itself and was like, there's some good stuff here, but it's pretty like low fare version, but like still fine for what it is.
And that sounds about right to me. It was just I just remember the True Love Waits needle drop happening, and I was like, "Oh, go fuck yourself! Don't do
You-
this.
The
Stop
bit,
it! Don't fucking
yeah.
take Tom York's grief and superimpose it into your shitty fucking movie."
I
Sorry if you
wasn't
like
the
that movie. I was just oh man, that was a very bad experience I had watching that.
You were in good company because I also kind of thought it was well, at least the first half I thought was ass. I remember liking the second half a little more,
The second
but
half is more involving, to be sure. The first half is very film studenty.
that there I distinctly remember there was a Tyler the Creator needle drop that made me go but yeah, other
And a
than that,
Kanye one. Can't forget the I Am a God drop.
mm,
Ooh, boy.
oh,
Ooh, Nelly.
oof,
That
man.
that that one ages worse and worse every year.
Hey, fun fact, the guy who made that made the movie the with The Weekend Hurry Up Tomorrow.
Oh God, yeah, you're right. That was
So,
him. I
yeah.
should watch that sometime. I've heard it's absolutely horrible.
There's a scene that like literally like cracked my brain where fucking The Weeknd is arguing with someone over the phone about something like completely benign and stupid, and then it's intercut with a shot of him doing boxing over a projection of like a 1930s German silent animated film that I knew what it was. And I was like, why is this happening?
This is what happens when we let musicians' egos run rampant. I like your music a fair bit, Abel, but Jesus Christ. Back on track. After Waves and Watchmen, we have 2020 featured two very memorable dual scores for me just because, well, I mean, they were scoring two of the only notable movies that released in 2020, that being the Pixar animated film Soul, as well as the David Fincher film Mank. And Mank is very different just because, well, I mean, the creative synergy between Fincher and Reznor continues here, and it feels like he is aiming to do what is an old Hollywood soundtrack, and it kind of sounds like that. It's
Yeah.
very, very different from anything he's ever made. But, there's some eccentricities in here that I think are worth paying attention to just because, kind of like the look of the film, Mank itself, it's kind of a weird in between of old and new that's, the friction between the two creates an interesting effect. I'm actually a pretty big fan of this movie that nobody seems to really like or remember.
Also here, also Mank Defender.
Okay, Mank Nation. I know that there are dozens of us. I think this is a really solid picture. I remember watching it on my birthday, I believe, But
Nice.
it's a very solid little movie. It's just very different from Fincher and Trent's very typical fare. If anything, I think it just proves that they're incredibly versatile artists.
Yeah, I like the score quite a bit, and there's like a couple of tracks in here that I still really come back to and really enjoy. And the funny thing though is like through all the Hollywood stylization in there, you still get like accidental bursts of like the Trent Reznor style coming in because there's a track called like it's like a trapped bird or something like that that has like an old Hollywood version of it, but then there's one that's like a reprise of it, and it's literally just dun dun dun,
He couldn't
dun,
help
dun,
himself.
dun. And I'm
He
like,
couldn't help
you
himself.
did it again. You has to be stopped.
However, to me, the notable standout here is the Soul score, which I have a complicated relationship with post 2013 Pixar just because not a lot of their movies have particularly grabbed me in the way that they did when I was a kid, and I would like to think that's because it feels like less of the interesting creatives at Pixar are allowed to do what they get to do, and it's really more, hey, what do people want? And it just, they're a
Yeah.
company that feels like they make movies by committee now. So I wasn't really super stoked for Soul, and it is probably my favorite film of 2020, and the score is not an insignificant reason why, because it is so, like, we kind of talked about how there were moments in the Gone Girl score, the pure sort of like the atmospheric washes. That's like this whole soundtrack is like all of the
Yeah.
stuff of the other world in Soul. Oh, the sound design is just exquisite. I
Beautifully.
love this soundtrack. Love it, love it, love it.
Same. I am quite a big fan of the soundtrack for this as well. And it's interesting because it like has such a it's them doing their first kids film and there's like moments of that where I can kind of feel like they definitely are trying their best to not make it sound too much like Nine Inch Nails and Trent Reznor stuff because some of it reminds me a lot of like Spyro the Dragon for some reason, like in the earlier bits.
That's interesting. Spyro the Dragon's early soundtracks done by Stuart Copeland of The Police. Fun fact
True.
for everyone. So I mean, like, there is a time-honored tradition of musicians from particularly big bands coming in and doing soundtracks that are incredibly distinct. In fact, I would say Trent Reznor is kind of the king of that at the current moment.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, Soul, big, big winner for me. And then another really big winner in 2022 with the soundtrack to Bones and All, which officially he has soundtracked my favorite movie of 2020 and 2022 because I absolutely adore Bones and All. It is like
Yes.
there are very few movies that distill my entire id. It's just like, hey, here's all the things I really love about fiction and aesthetics and stories and just like iconography. We're just gonna steal it right from my brain. Here's the movie, and the guy who did from Nine Inch Nails did the soundtrack. So, and Luca Guadagnino, who I love, directed the film. And this is also kind of a this to me most reminds me of the Watchmen score in not that it sounds similar to the Watchmen score, but in that it feels like every era of the soundtracks finds its way into this. Like there are some moments like the
Mm.
scene with there's a certain scene involving a close up with some really heavy red lighting in Timothy Chalamet's face. That like there's some like really big buzzy electro synth shit going on there, but
Yeah.
there's this shocking amount of atmospheric, slow kind of like honestly slow core adjacent stuff that I think is really, really somber and really, really effective.
Yeah, and there's even like the last track of the film that plays in the credits is like a full-on
You made
orchestral
it feel
piece.
like home. That's a gorgeous
Well,
song.
not even that. It's the reprise of the open the wide open, I think is what is.
Yeah, yeah, both
But
fantastic.
but we do gotta mention You Make It Feel Like Home because that's like one of those original songs that left such an impression on me when I watched. Like I literally, me and the person that I watched it with, we are kind of funny because we're like two people who will watch a movie but sort of like comment on it if there's like no one else in the theater. And in this case, only people in the theater, like just completely dead. And we were doing our usual business, but then like when the final 10 minutes happened, we were just like curled up into our seats and we left the movie theater and all went our separate ways and I just laid in my bed and like listened to the song.
it is a lay in bed and listen to this song kind of like it's very sad, very kind of overbearing, lots of melodrama here, but it very much works. I feel like uh Guadagnino is the kind of collaborator that very much works in a way that Fincher does. I mean, Guadagnino very notably on the film before that, the Suspiria remake, my favorite horror film of all time, we got Tom York of Radiohead. And it kind of
Mhm.
feels like Luca, well, other than the fact that he's clearly just taken whatever's on his playlist and being like, hey, you want to score my movie? Which, mad fucking respect, because if I was a director, I would do the exact same thing. Like, are you kidding me? Of course I would try and get the guy from Nine Inch Nails to score my movie. Are you kidding? But
Imagine.
it really synthesizes really well and gives us an original song that is fantastic. In that same year, we also got, or well, in the following, no, it is the same year. We got the soundtrack to Sam Mendes's Empire of Light, and I'm gonna be so real with you. I forget that this happened. Like I feel like I read it and I feel like I got Men in Black laser eyed because I don't remember this movie even coming out or existing or even what it was really about, even though I'm pretty sure I saw the trailer 5 times.
Here's the thing, right? It's a terrible movie. Utterly fucking horrendous
I've
movie,
I've heard
but
it's like wet toilet paper cinema paradiso.
it's I called it Goodbye Dragging On is what I called it. And here's the
That's
thing
really
though.
good.
Here's the thing though. This score is kind of very just whatever in the context of the movie, but I give it the pass because it was the perfect study music for college.
You know, whatever gets you there. Like sometimes you just need something that's perfect background noise. And I mean, I can think of worse things you could have
Like
tried to listen to.
genuinely, if you have to like write something that's not like really intensive, just play the soundtrack for this film and you'll be like, yeah, no, that was pretty all right.
And it's hard for me to care too much when in the following year we get the soundtrack to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, which I had not seen and watched in preparation for this, which
Yes.
I am delighted to report is a fucking awesome movie. Like, what a fun, silly, gorgeously animated. I say gorgeous even though everything in the movie is kind of intentionally ugly, but that's kind of why I respect it. There's a kind of punk
Yeah.
rock quality that this movie does have that I really, really love and appreciate. And I love how this soundtrack is just like, oh, let's just make fucking fun music. Let's just make
Yeah.
music to beat the shit out of people too. Like this is if
Yeah.
I went to the gym, this is what I would listen to while at the gym.
This is I love this soundtrack because also something I should mention is like this is a case of both like the score and the soundtrack, like the needle drops used are all just like really like I gotta give them props because I knew what they were
Bro,
doing with this shit.
the first time they used Anti Up, I was like, fuck yeah. The
I
second time they used Anti Up, I was like,
my
yo.
thing I think like the minute I was like, okay, this kind of rules is when they play the fucking shimmy shimmy song. And I was
It's
like,
awesome.
you got Old Dirty Bastard in a children's film.
If you need a good kids movie and if you like the animation style of movies like the Spider-Verse films or Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, if that kind of animation, you really love that kind of stuff, I really can't recommend this enough. This is just a blast of a movie. Like I truly think that it is like an actually good film. Like I would
Yes.
recommend it breathlessly just because the style is so awesome. And something I appreciate about it is just that I love the way that the turtles just talk like kids. Like they
Yeah.
just like if you were to go to a middle school for, a good reason, I hope, and you overheard the kids talking there, this is what they'd sound like.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Ice Cube is the villain. It's the best
It's
Ice
on
Cube has been in a movie in like 20 years.
agree. And it's like and the soundtrack is so interesting to me because when I think of like a kids film soundtrack, I think of like Soul, right? Soul is like
Hmm.
much more of like a kids film soundtrack.
Light,
And
atmospheric.
this is
This
like
is
probably the
Oh, and
most abrasive like Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross soundtrack. And it's so funny because it's like we were talking about like the Great Destroyer and like that ear splitting bit in like the second half, and it's
yep.
like it's kind of like I mean this absolutely positively, keep in mind. I mean that it's kind of like that for most of this film actually.
No, it's kind of the music and the visual style of the film work beautifully together in terms of the fact that like they're both kind of intentionally ugly, but they both have so much momentum and energy that it's like, yeah, this somehow works.
And
And it
it's
ends up being great.
And it's thematically potent too. It's not even just like we're doing this because we're just, doing it for the sake of doing it. I mean, like, because a whole lot of the Ninja Turtles film is like these characters that like are assumed to be like horrible monsters are just like, regular people. And so having this very ugly visual style and audio style that's still really compelling and like genuinely affecting is, hey, you actually thought about the thematic weight of the stuff in your fucking baby movie.
All these things come together in a way that I think not only makes sense, but just genuinely makes for a great film. So if you didn't check that out, like I just kind of missed it just because I'm not really a Turtles person, just because I haven't been exposed to anything. And then I did that and I was like, shit, I might like pick up a comic or something. That was awesome. And after that, I'm bad. I'm a self-professed David Fincher fanboy, and I haven't seen The Killer. It's old. I haven't seen it. I have no good reason. I could literally turn on Netflix right now and watch it. I'm sorry. I'm
Here's
bad.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing, right? I was like a Mink defender. I'm not so much of the killer defender, if I'm being honest.
I have heard like the circles I run in, even like most of the people I'm like with are just like, nah, like a lot of them are big fans of movies like Mank. I definitely detected a cooler temperature in the room on The Killer that has not like did not incentivize me to watch it immediately when it came out.
And in terms of score, the same applies here. And like honestly, musically speaking, the only notable thing is that the main character like almost primarily listens to the Smiths.
Which I mean, I'm guessing the vibe they're going for is projecting somebody completely fucking insufferable. So,
Yes.
and I like the Smiths. Just come on, guys.
It's funny though because it's like it's a character who is like talking about like, we must, like do the procedure, you must
I'm
not have
Michael
any music.
Fassbender, and I kill people for a living.
And then he fucks up the first scene in the movie.
I have heard that it is basically a comedy of errors, and that does interest me slightly. So
Yeah.
I'll get to this eventually. But honestly, the lack of buzz around the soundtrack was partially why I wasn't like super jazzed in the first place. Is that I was like,
Yeah.
oh well, okay.
Like there's only one piece of music that I remember just because it was interesting in that it's like it's a chase scene, but it's like just this kind of very ambient drone rather than like any actual chase music.
And after that, we get maybe the most high profile. I think this is probably the biggest soundtrack that he's done since The Social Network in terms of like making the rounds and appreciation. And that being, of course, the second collaboration between him and Luca Guadagnino, that being Challengers, which we were
Yes.
rapturous when that movie came out. That was also my favorite movie of that particular year. Luca Guadagnino, can you please like Jesus Christ, dude, you're like I can't believe that the same guy made my favorite movie of the year 3 times in a row. That
Mm.
doesn't happen to me. I watch a lot of fucking movies, but I'm a
You have a type.
dyed-in-the-wool fan, I guess, at this point, and the Challenger score. Oh, I mean, bro, I've been bumping this shit constantly. Constantly. That and
Yeah.
the sort of remix album that was released
Yes.
alongside it by the artist who
Boys
am I
Noise, I think.
Boys Noise, who I believe were they with Trent when you saw him in
Yes,
concert?
they were. I wasn't as hot about their stuff in the pre-show, but
Mhm.
also that was just a case of like it was literally so bassy and loud. I thought my heart was gonna fucking pop out of my chest.
Well, and the thing about the Challenger soundtrack is that this is just house music. This is just
Yeah.
industrial electro house, and it fucking kicks. Like the
Yeah.
rhythm here, the energy. This is the most like high octane Trent Reznor score. So like if you need to like run to music,
Yes.
this is what I would reach for.
Yeah,
Like the
this is the None with a Motherfucking Gun track, but if that was just the whole soundtrack.
and it kicks. It's awesome. And I kind of think that this being so like basically this is gay club music,
It
which
is.
is why we get the next collaboration between Trent Reznor and Luca Guadagnino, Queer. I have no doubt in my mind that this was the direct line of thinking of like, well, if
Yeah.
Challengers was gay club music and I'm doing this fucking movie about like, identity and sexuality and a queer man, navigating queer spaces and what have you, let's get Trent and Atticus to do the soundtrack. And the funny thing is that it sounds nothing fucking like the Challenger soundtrack at all. In fact, I would say that this is closest to like Soul if you had to
Yeah.
pick like what it terms of like the sound font and what it sounds like. But like, no, this is the soundtrack for Queer is amazing. Like,
It's
wow,
it's also
blew me
kind
away.
of like like for me the most like literally everything they've tried so far has been put into this one thing because there's so much like audio like variance with this one in so
Oh
many
yeah.
ways. Also another case of also just incredible needle drops because, the Nirvana one
The
definitely made
fuck
me like sit
doom
up a
doom
bit.
doom 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 doom. That fucking that sequence is great. I this is just my opportunity to shout out that everybody needs to watch Queer. That is
Yes,
it's
agreed.
an amazing adaptation. It's an amazing movie in its own right and just like hit me real hard. Like it was a Luca movie, so I went in knowing like, oh, okay, I'm probably gonna dig this. But to the degree like Challengers was his big hit that year, and everybody was like, "Oh, he's got Queer too." And then I watched
Yeah.
that, and I'm like, "Nah, but like this is kind of almost as good as Challengers is, if I'm being real." Like it's
Yeah.
very different movie, but it just kind of proves how great of a director he is, and how great of a composer Trent is that he did both. And again, worlds apart. I would describe the Queer soundtrack as being like the most avant-garde of all the soundtracks. It is the
Yes.
strangest. It is the one that kind of unsettles you the most. And it's because the movie is a lot like very unsettling to, many extents, but it's such a like surreal and bizarre movie that the soundtrack like matches its freak and thus ends up
Yeah.
being this really, really interesting experience.
Like the thing, like the tracks that I think of the most are like, you have like your kind of like more traditional kind of orchestral sounding like themes, but then more than halfway into the movie when basically like there's a change of scenery where they go to like a like they basically go on like a side quest. You
Yeah.
get like what is like house music also.
Hmm.
And it made me go like, "Wait, what the fuck? Is this a needle drop?" And I was like, "No, this is not a needle drop. This was original music for this."
It's not even a movie where like a lot happens. It's a pretty kind of slow character drama thing, but like the music that will just like the way that the movie is just kind of structured and just kind of ebbs and flows back and forth, it's so like erratic, and the soundtrack has to match that energy, which can't be easy. But the fact that he did it, hats off. It's one of the most interesting things I think they've ever made. And
Yeah.
there is also the soundtrack to the film The Gorge, which I don't really care. The only other thing that I glossed over really is that technically this was released as an EP and is not is like counted amongst the other ones, but Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross did also do the soundtrack to the Jonah Hill, I think, debut movie mid 90s, which I
Yes.
also haven't seen and have kind of forgotten about because that was a big movie like in the early days of like film Twitter, which the people
Yeah.
listening to this don't even know what that fucking means because this is just the scene that we met in when there was like a bunch of cinephiles on Twitter, and this is how literally
Yeah.
everyone on this channel knows each other. And it was a long fucking time ago.
Because like no one uses Twitter now.
Yes, thankfully. And if you do,
Yeah.
please, God, get Blue Sky. Jesus Christ.
But mid 90s is another case of like I think it's a better score than Empire of Light, but it's definitely like another this was music I used to study too because it's very like it's honestly kind of funny. I describe the music as like walking around in the overworld of a video game type music. That's how I describe it.
I mean, I guess there are worse things that you could be. And thus, that kind of ends the coverage of the soundtrack work of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. There are plenty of like one-off collaborations. Like I said, there's that cover of Immigrant Song that was in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo with, I believe, Karen O of the Yeah Yeah
Yes.
Yeahs is singing
I'm
that
pretty
one,
sure that was
which
Carano.
God, that's so fucking based. Like, that's so cool. But,
It
like,
is pretty cool.
these collaborations to me are important because, again, they are how I see Trent evolving his fringe tendencies as an artist. And he allows himself to sort of diverge at this point and make his film soundtrack work and the Nine Inch Nails catalog two distinct entities. And thus, these next couple of albums afterwards feel like they have a little bit more of a definitive identity than maybe the last two, where it feels like Trent was leaning towards conceptual frameworks in order to maybe reorient himself and kind of recapture some of that magic of the downward spiral, or just reorienting himself in general, like he did on With Teeth. And now we're kind of entering an era of the Nine Inch Nails catalog that is weirder, more experimental, a little bit less talked about, but in my opinion, debatably, some of the most interesting music that this band is ever going to create. And we have also Atticus Ross contributing to a lot of these records in meaningful ways that, you know, there is a lot to say about some of these next albums that are coming up, and I feel as though time will be kind to a couple of them in ways that I hope time has been kind to albums like With Teeth and Year Zero, as they are kind of the distinct middle era of the band. And now, after this, we are going to progress to the final phase of Nine Inch Nails and potentially see what the future for this band could potentially look like.
That just reminded me of something though. Though I don't know if it counts because it's not under the Trent and Atticus name, but we didn't talk about the Tron soundtrack.
Oh, yeah, I mean the single was Mad Dece. I like that. That was a
Yeah.
very good Nine Inch Nails song. The score is I mean it sounds like Daft Punk.
Yeah.
It's it's just kind of, it's good.
Yeah.
There's
I liked Who Wants to Live Forever. That one's good. I like that one.
yeah, just, fucking Jared Leto.
Gamers. Anyways,
Gamers. If
gaming.
you enjoyed this episode, please contemplate subscribing, liking, doing all that fun junk, calling us stupid in the comments, whatever you want. We'll be here to listen.
Yeah.
However, join us next time when we are going to be covering the next official record in the Nine Inch Nails discography, which, you know, there is a lot to say about some of these Nine Inch Nails records that have been a little bit less talked about by people at large, but I can guarantee that the consensus on albums like The Slip, Hesitation Marks, Bad Witch, and the kind of sister EPs of that, I feel like we have not collectively decided what we think of these albums. So I am just fascinated to kind of definitively come to an opinion on some of them. So join us next time when we cover basically the final phase of Nine Inch Nails, and hopefully we can unearth some stuff that is worth listening to and worth talking about. So until next time, folks.